We are live in 5, 4, 3.
And we are back, folks, here on the Michigan Insider, Sports Talk 1050, WTKA, online at WTK.com. Sam Webb, Mr. Ira Weintraub on the other side, and it is time for the MGoBlog Roundtable. And, fellas, it is game week. Joining us, as always, on the MGoBlog Roundtable is the man who started it all over at MGoBlog, Brian Cook. Brian, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Sam.
Fired up for game week, even though it's ECU and they're going to kill them 100-0?
No. Yes, maybe.
Seth Fisher, how are you this morning again?
I'm great. Just stop telling me about how many guys are injured in the secondary because I'm starting to get a little nervous back there.
And then, of course, we'll get into that coming up. And, of course, the venerable one, as I call him, Mr. Craig Ross. Craig, how are you?
I'm allegedly alive. I want to commend the MGoBlog site this week. They did a 7-hour podcast.
Good grief.
On a 7-hour podcast on Michigan football. It is very good. They get a little slap happy at the end, but that's understandable. And it really was excellent work. Congratulations, you and Alex and David.
Yep.
Yeah, did a great job. And secondly, I think Brian has written many fine articles on the site, but he wrote a brilliant one this week that I commend to everyone, which has a very portable little story in it. And I think that our portable idea, I'm a big fan of portable ideas, things that you can use in all elements of your life. And I'm going to pull this one out for myself and for Brian at times about that this is a story that is meaningful in our day-to-day ways that we sort of approach life and the things we're doing. So congratulations, Brian. It's a wonderful, wonderful piece and it's brilliant.
To clarify to the readers, what he's talking about is Chris Jenkins's love of tendies.
You did 7 hours on that?
Mentioned it.
So I had Seth already kind of talk about Jim's comments, his comment to open the press conference. I want to kind of keep this as a fraction of the conversation today because we talk so much not football, seeming where we have anyway in recent weeks. Just starting with you, Brian, your thoughts on Jim coming out of the gate in the press conference, not talking about the self-imposed suspension or the breaking down of coaching duties. No, he wanted to talk about revenue sharing and the model of college football that will not stand unless there is a change. Your reaction to Jim kind of stepping out front again.
Well, he's done this over the course of his career. He's clearly a guy with principles, and sometimes they're principles that you don't share, but you can't ever doubt his genuine belief in the things that he says. So, I think it's good for him to get it out there, and I think it's he's right. And I hope that sooner rather than later, we're talking about how to actually actualize this. But it's game week.
It's game week. Craig?
Yeah, I mean, I'm often impressed with what Harbaugh does, and I'm often impressed with the fact that he's willing to walk the walk too. I mean, a couple of years ago, he marched in the Black Lives Matter march, and that's not something that most football coaches would do. He went to Washington D.C. twice to testify in favor of legal aid agencies and funding legal aid, which I thought was a good thing. You never know where he's going to be because his politics are neither right nor left in the main, but he does, he just doesn't talk it. He'll take some energy to show you that, this is something that I really believe in and it's something that's worthwhile. And, he a couple of years ago, wasn't he the first one that talked about transfer portal that we should have and that happened more or less. And so now he's talking about revenue sharing. And to me, this combines with something the NCAA should have agreed to a number of years ago, which is unionization of players. And when the Northwestern guys said, hey, we should be unionized, the NCAA should have said right from the beginning, you're right. But I don't think you're going to have revenue sharing without a players union and players negotiating this. And so those two things come hand in hand. So I don't see, to my way of thinking at least, so I don't see much happening on this end until players have some sort of unified voice.
Yeah, I wonder if these collectives sort of forming this collective kind of coming together and kind of organizing their efforts. It's not a union, but is it a pseudo union that could align strategy on this? I wonder if that will be the case, because I mean the next TV contract for the Big Ten is what, 7 years away. It's gonna be more. As those numbers increase, you just got the environment for discontent to heat up even more. So, you know, we'll see. I think we see it in the next 10 years. I think we see it in the next 10 years. But I want to talk football like you guys want to talk football. Now, here's the problem. How much football does ECU actually play? I mean, can you give me a breakdown of ECU, Brian, Seth, or Craig, that makes me think that this is that there's a bigger concern here than getting more injured than they already are, talking about Michigan?
Well, I mean, you got to get Alex Drain on here if you want to talk about ECU.
Hey, I wrote the article for Hail the Victors this year.
What?
So what can you tell us about ECU, Seth?
I mean, last year was the year for them. They were like they were coming up for a long time. They had they actually had some pretty good recruits. They pulled it all together, and like last year was going to be the big push, and they just didn't have a kicker. And so they lost a bunch of games by like 1 or 2 points. They should have had a 9-win season, and instead it kind of fell apart at the end. And then everybody left. They are interesting. They have a 4-star quarterback, Mason Garcia, who's been in the program now for a few years. And I mean, this guy's like a tank. He's huge. So he's kind of be interesting to watch. It's going to take a few dudes to like get him down. But you know, they're a program. They're not just as bad as the teams we saw at the beginning of the year last year.
Okay.
ECU's got a program. They've got guys who've been sitting behind other players. I think their big problem is their defense just got picked apart by the portal after spring. So they had some dudes that they were ready to rely on, and teams that needed somebody at the end of spring go, hey, let's take them from ECU. So they lost a big guard that way. They had to move another guy to center that they don't really think is a center. And there's only 3 starters on defense and 3 on offense from last year. And a lot of them, you know, the quarterback's a guy who's coming up, but like most of them are not guys they're expecting to play this year because the portal just ripped them to shreds. So their style of play is very kind of bend, don't break. So it might get a little annoying, and it might be a lot of, you know, grinding down the field and be a quick game.
Okay. Well, like I said, the biggest opponent in this game, in my opinion, is injury. And at the same time, with the injuries that Michigan has going into the game, I can't remember which one of you guys said don't tell me that they are going to have an entirely injured secondary. If it's me, Brian, if I got a guy who's not 90%, I'm sitting him this game. So if Rod Moore and Makari Page have been, you know, slightly hobbled here in recent weeks, I'm just telling them, hey, fellas, take the week off. You come back versus UNLV. I'm playing any guy that is slightly injured. I'm sitting them down this game.
Yeah, I mean, that's a reasonable approach. We've seen Michigan be very careful with injuries in the past, especially last year. And you don't want to get anyone seriously hurt in a game that you're, I think, a 31-point favorite in. So it makes sense. It is a little disconcerting that it seems like so many people are suddenly banged up. Well, they've probably been banged up through camp, but, you know, Michigan doesn't tell anybody anything. So they kind of came out last second. And you just hope that nothing is serious. So I would like to see them out there, because if they're out there, then that means that they're good to go.
Well, so what I've heard, and Craig, I want you to chime in here as well, is that there are no serious injuries. Guys have really been, they've had tweaks, and there's just been a little more. They've been more cautious, and it first started being evident to me with the running backs. Like Blake may have said it in a press conference, like, I'm not getting hit. I'm not getting hit at all, and that's like, that's like uncharted territory for a Michigan running back to not be getting hit. I don't care if he is coming off an injury. Jim Harbaugh, you're hitting, and they've kind of taken it a little more easy on some of those guys who have returned from injury, who might be a little hobbled this year. Now they might go down on the depth chart. They still do that. Like if you're hurt, Jim still push you down on the depth chart. But as far as kind of banging them and that kind of thing, they just seem to me, at least to me, from the outside looking in, Craig, seem to be a little more cautious in this preseason or in this fall camp than they have in past ones.
Yeah, it seems that way. I mean, none of us actually know how bad these injuries are or what they are. And I mean, it seems like they're not bad, that they're relatively minor things, but we don't really know. I'm leery of the idea that we have a guy who's just very slightly hurt, but we're just going to not play him, or a guy that we're not playing because we're afraid he's going to get hurt. At some point it's football. You got to play the game, and you're going to get hit, and you're going to hit people. And if you go 7 games without being hit or not hitting anyone, I'm not sure that's such a good thing. I mean, and I doubt if the coaching staff perceives it as such a good thing either. And I'm also a little bit leery of the notion, well, these are weak teams, we can, just sort of cruise or skate in them. ECU was 8-5 last year. They lost by 1 point to North Carolina State when they missed a chip shot field goal and an extra point. They lost to Cincy 27-25, and they lost to Navy in double overtime. So this is a team that easily could have been 11-2. Now it's true they've been completely replaced. That this is a new team, but it's a program that it's not a meatball program, and their coach is Mike Houston seems to be a good coach. So I don't want to just say, oh yeah, we'll just go out there, we're just going to walk over them and we'll play our second and third team guys. No, I don't. That one doesn't feel that obvious to me. And so it makes me a bit nervous, but I'm always the most of people on this show. I'm always the most nervous, I guess. So
yeah, I would be leery of sitting guys for the entire non-conference. I'm not leery of sitting them one game when the next 2 are going to be just like it. So if a
next
guy
2 are going to be easier, I think.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of makes my point even more.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Yeah, I don't like. It depends how injured you are.
Right.
The thing is, like last year, Nikai Hill-Green was a guy they absolutely needed, and going into the first week, they were like, it's got a soft tissue issue. It's not a big deal. And then it just kept lingering and lingering and going and going. And if there's a lot of these guys, what are the chances that we're not going to have Rod Moore or something like that for a while? Plus, I mean, these are tune-up games. You got to get tuned up, right? You gotta get in the feel of it. And football, I know this is a little cosmic for us, but football does not reward you for easing off the gas, right? You remember last year, Blake Corum stepped out against Illinois when he didn't have to, and everyone's like, "Oh, that's defensible. We got Ohio State next week." And then, there's something in football. If you're not going 100%, something happens to you. I believe in this.
Oh,
I'm on the same page. 100% with you on this one, Seth.
Yeah, I guess I'm not superstitious like that.
How are you not superstitious? You're a Michigan fan. Do I need to name the things that have happened?
I didn't say I'm not superstitious.
When we've eased off the gas.
I didn't say I'm not superstitious at all. I'm not superstitious like that. To that extent, where I feel like, hey man, if he steps out of bounds, early in the game, he's gonna blow his knee out later.
No, I'm not. Well, you can't say 1-1, but you can just say whenever you ease off the gas in this game, something bad happens to you.
I think that we're going to see a good number of guys sit out without it being like I think there's a decent chance, in the secondary and at receiver, that at least one guy in both instances, and maybe even two. And on the secondary side, it's Rod and Makari. On the receiver side, it's Peyton O'Leary and Tyler Morris. I think some of those guys, if not all of them, aren't going to play on Saturday. So, I've heard nothing to suggest that it's a serious thing, and it's an opportunity to see some of those other guys. They've talked a lot about Quentin Johnson, for instance, as a guy that they feel like is ready to take a step. We get a chance to see he's more of a veteran guy. On the offensive side, they've been talking about these young receivers. And look, I'm not expecting any of these guys to come in and be Big Ten Freshman of the Year. But Samaj Morgan, Carmelo English, and especially Fred Moore. Those guys have had camps, the kind of camps that make me think they're going to be legit contributors this year. I think one of those guys will probably even start the first game. So I'm excited about that.
I saw because there seemed to be some lack of enthusiasm in the Michigan fan base about Samaj Morgan and Fred Moore. And so whenever I see that, I'll go back and watch the tape. And I thought Fred Moore was a remarkably advanced route runner. I don't think he's a burner, but he's a remarkably advanced route runner, and he catches the ball. And Samaj is fast as all get out. He reminds me of the kid who was at Penn State from the
Eaglet?
Yes. And he's really fast, and so those are two guys who I thought were really good recruits, regardless of what their ratings were. I didn't look at Carmelo English, but I know people are talking him up. So, any event, yeah, I'm excited to see those guys.
English was like the guy who was supposed to be the most college ready.
Yeah.
Frederick Morris, the guy I comp to Ronnie Bell. He's he's fast. He gets open. He's got good hands. Well,
see, Ronnie wasn't fast, and Fred Moore is fast. And so that's the misconception about Fred Moore. The knock on him was that he was like a mid 4.5, 4.6 guy. He had run like an 11-something 100-meter early in his high school career, and it was he was tagged with it the rest of the way. My understanding was
in the
like
snow. He did that in the snow, and
right?
Still like, what are you doing? Like,
yeah,
like, why is that the thing that's labeling me?
100%. You're all over it.
Yeah.
He didn't run again. He got with the track coach and was running track, but didn't do the 100-meter again, maybe at all. But you watch the film. Texas A&M went on him. Michigan obviously went on him. Some other schools. And the thought, I ran into the Texas A&M school, Texas A&M coach, area recruiter, when I was in St. Louis that time. When I went to see all these guys, went to see him, went to see my man over at SLU, St. Louis University, the 5-star receiver that Michigan is still on. Went to see him. Went to see a bunch of guys, but I talked to the A&M guy, and they were on Fred Moore. They were like on Fred Moore. And there was just this, feeling like they had a secret, like they had their hand in a cookie jar because they thought he was better than a lot of other schools did. Michigan was the same way. And he gets to camp, and his deep ball skills are better than the guys they have on the team. Right? And they have some guys who've shown the ability to get on top of receivers and track the ball deep. But his skill set in that regard, separation out of breaks, tracking the ball deep, combined with speed, they feel like they haven't had one to this degree in Jim Harbaugh's tenure. So, how does that show up this season? I don't know, but
there's a thing we do with the recruiting profiles. I didn't get to do that. I didn't get to label a guy the sleeper of the year. We always pick one, and Brian's got a really good track record, and then I picked a Morion last year. So we have a pretty decent. You can usually tell. There's things that pop out, and I was like, had in the back of my mind the whole time I was doing Fred Moore write-up that like this is going to be the guy. And then at the last second, I went back and checked all the recruiting rankings just to see if they'd changed. And Rivals of all people, like the one site that almost never changes their minds on a guy, made him a 4-star and disqualified him. But he was kind of one of those guys that was sticking up. Ben Hall's probably going to be the one, but I didn't get to write the article, so I guess I get to cheat this year.
So give me your take on this one, Brian. I'm curious because I've been went back and forth with Joe all last year about the passing game. His point was lack of sophistication in the passing game being a problem. Mine was lack of emphasis of the passing game being the bigger issue. And toward the end of the season, we started to see them emphasize the pass more out of necessity, and they made some hay that way. Guys were getting open more than you could see if you didn't have the all 22. But JJ wasn't always finding them earlier in the year, and they kind of took their foot off the gas pedal when it came to pushing the ball down the field. Some of those times late in the year, they started to do that more. It's conceivable to think you just pick up where you left off last year and you're fine. But what I'm hearing is they have given some attention to being more sophisticated in the passing game with timing, with spacing, kind of taking more to the idea of scheming guys open as opposed to relying on their athleticism and technique to always get them open. Do you think that is going to be a tangible, if true, do you think that's going to be a tangible benefit for Michigan this year?
No.
No, as to what?
I don't think they need it. I don't think it needs to be more sophisticated because Roman Wilson is going to the NFL Combine. He's going to put up a 4.2, right? We've seen him. We've seen him on the field, and I was going over receiver stats from last year when I was posting, and everybody was talking about how JJ McCarthy did not get help from his receivers. So amongst college football playoff participants last year, Michigan had by far the worst catch rates on contested catches. Their yards per catch on contested opportunities was something like 2.6. And so I went back and I looked at Pro Football Focus and I saw what they had listed for their contested catches. And the guys coming back this year from that receiving core, including Colston Loveland and Donovan Edwards, were 12 of 17 on contested catches, which is great. Now, it's not a lot of sample size. And the guys who left, Ronnie Bell was 3 of 18. And the rest of the guys who left were something like 6 of 17. So I think this year, all you have to do is migrate Ronnie Bell's targets to Roman Wilson and Cornelius Johnson and Colston Loveland and Donovan Edwards, and you will get an uptick. And the thing about Wilson is Wilson doesn't need to have great route running skills because what he does, and then you get beat. And the next time he stops and you've turned yourself 180 degrees away from him. So, I mean, for me, what you need to do is you need to target Colston Loveland when nobody else is open. And you need to prioritize looking at Roman Wilson because Roman Wilson's going to be open. He's just going to be open. And then the other thing that Michigan needs to do is they need to run more play action. So JJ McCarthy led the country last year in yards per attempt on play action. He led the country by 2.5 yards. Wow. The number 2 guy was Stetson Bennett, and the gap between JJ McCarthy and Stetson Bennett was the same size as the gap between Stetson Bennett and the number 26 guy. It was a huge gap.
We talked about that a ton last year.
And
definitely. Yeah.
There are 78 quarterbacks in this selection. There's Power 5 guys who had a reasonable number of attempts. And JJ was 67th in percentage of play action attempts.
Yeah.
That makes no sense. And I mean, you have this running game, right? You have Blake Corum, you have Donovan Edwards, you have these incredible offensive linemen. You should default to play action on anything except 3rd and 10.
Yeah, there was definitely a lot of shows on talking about play action shots, more play action shots, and they just it took them a minute to get comfortable with calling more of them. But when they did, and I mean that's a function of JJ's health, function of chemistry with the receivers. Roman, who we talked to about it, he said, "Man, we just weren't really totally on the same page, receivers and quarterback, until the Ohio State game." He said, "Just one of those things that happens when a guy misses the entire offseason You know, it takes you a minute to dial it in, but once we got rolling, we were rolling, and now you pick up where you left off in that regard. I wonder what do you think, Craig? I mean, do you think
Yeah.
that the kind of relying a little more on scheme in addition to what they did last year will have a tangible benefit to the passing game?
Well, to me, I find the notion that the passing game lacks sophistication bizarre. Coming off a year when Michigan is 13-0, going into the TCU game, and the TCU game didn't have much, in my opinion, to do with the lack of sophistication, but 2 pick sixes, terrible red zone calls, and a terrible ref call at the goal line. To me, the problems in the TCU game were more on defense, probably, and maybe a little slow to change during the midst of the game. But I don't, Brian, I've talked on this show a lot about yards per pass attempt, that if you're going to do a single variable analysis, that's the one. That's the one that most connects to winning and losing, aside from turnovers. And if JJ is 2.5 yards better than the next competitor on play action yards per pass attempt, it isn't a lack of sophistication. It's just not enough play action. And that makes complete sense given the fact that our running game was spectacular, and that and that the offensive line was very good. And so, play action should be a staple of the offense. It would, more play action would help the run game also. And, I'm with Brian on this completely. I did not know this stat about the play action stat, but it's a remarkable one.
Well, I'm just looking this stuff up, and I'm like, I'm sorting the column by various like percentages, and I'm like, what is going on with this?
They had 25 yards per attempt on play action against TCU. 25 yards per attempt. That is just insane. No kind of play, no big box should ever be that out of whack. And
how many times did they run play action, Seth?
I think it was 8 or 9 or something like that. It wasn't a lot, but it was not, or no, 6.
But that's
6.
6. It was 6.
It was 6. Yeah. 6 times.
So
and they averaged 25 yards. But like, you look in the middle of the season last year, and people were questioning until they got to the Ohio State game. People were wondering if JJ couldn't throw the deep ball. And because during the middle of the season, I think like his arm strength got better and he was overshooting guys a little bit. But then you watch those routes again, and Cornelius Johnson like takes a look inside and slows up. Like he's coming, like he's expecting it to drop down. And if he just kept on going, and this happened a few times, the ball is going to drop right into his lap. And you see lots of NFL throws that are like that, where the ball just goes right down the sideline and the receiver doesn't have to break his stride. And he's got 2 yards when it's thrown, and he's got 2 yards on the cornerback when he catches it. And the receivers were not trusting him to get the ball there. Now, I think it makes sense. You say he was injured all for most of the offseason. I don't think he was really healthy until halfway through fall camp. And they're used to Cade McNamara, and that's where Cade would put the ball. So, I mean, they just didn't run it enough, and part of not running enough is that you don't know where the ball is going to be.
Yeah, you definitely we were advocating for more play passes all year long. I think there is a danger in taking the lowest. TCU is a Big 12 defense, and so is Ohio State, for that matter. You look at the pros in Maryland secondary, the pros in Illinois secondary, the pros in Penn State's secondary. It wasn't as necessary against Penn State because you were bum rushing them. On the ground, you didn't really have to throw the ball in that game. But as you face the higher caliber defenses and secondaries, more play passing, more passing in general, more quarterback dependency, I think, are all on the menu. But I think there's this feeling, and maybe this is just a function of who Kirk Campbell is as an offensive guy, because I think it's his influence when it comes to the timing and the spacing and the passing game, and that being more of a complement to what Sharon Moore is. I think this is what I'm talking about. That's where we see it. That maybe the attention to scheme as an enhancement of what they do well and what they should have done more of last year. Well, this would be another element. So when you face, Devin Witherspoon, when you face Joey Porter Jr., or when you face some of these top I can't remember the Maryland guys, both of whom were 4-3 guys. When you face those
Team
guys,
Jarrett.
yeah, I'm talking about the defensive guys.
Oh, defense. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, when you face those guys, you get them open with play action. Yeah, you get them open with great technique and route running. But are there some times where you just scheme them wide open too, even on some of the non-play action plays? I think that's Kirk Campbell's influence. Maybe it won't be necessary, but hey, better to have it and to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it.
Well, yeah. And the other thing is, like, for big chunks of this year, you're getting zone coverage. Because if you run Colson Loveland, AJ Barner, and Donovan Edwards out on the field, you're getting zone coverage. Because otherwise, when you motion into empty out of that, you get a linebacker chasing Donovan Edwards, and that's
Cancel
over.
Christmas.
Right. Yeah. So you got a pretty good idea.
Put the linebacker on Colson Loveland, though. I mean,
well, yeah, and that's the thing. Like, so
better than Edwards. Yeah.
If you put out that personnel, how do you match up with that as a defense? Because if you go with a nickel against that, well, Michigan's just going to take their 21 personnel, run it down your throat. But if you put out a linebacker, what is he covering? What is he doing out there? So I feel like they're going to have some opportunities to do that kind of stuff. And, I think what did Matt Weiss do around here?
So Matt Weiss was, and so we'll get into this on the other side. He was a brilliant in the pass in the run game. I told this story before. Michigan had been clinicking with the Ravens on the run before he was hired. They were clinicking with the Ravens in the run game, and they were clinicking with Matt Weiss.
Okay.
Right. And so, he brings that intense run game expertise to the equation. Now, he had some passing knowledge too. But that wasn't his forte. Like that's why when Kirk was hired, that's why you heard people in JJ circles saying, "Oh, they got a quarterback guy. They got a quarterback guy."
Right.
That was why.
So Michigan's offensive brain trust last year was the Ravens run game guy, an offensive line coach, and Jim Harbaugh.
100%. 100%. Right.
All right.
Right.
Well, I think we're going to move a little bit more towards balance this year. So be run heavy.
that was the open the hood and go. I think I see your problem here, ma'am.
Well,
all right. Let's get to a break though. And as we get to this break, Ira, let's jam in Joe's garage, man.
We can jam in Joe's
garage.
Right.
If you want to join us inside the Bud Light Victor's Lounge where we do the key bank countdown and kickoff, all you got to do is be caller number 7 at 734-998-1050. Again, 734-998-1050. You'll join us inside of
We can jam in Joe's garage.
And you'll join us here on the other side of the Michigan Insider on Sports Talk 1050 WTKA, The Ticket.
Clear on the radio, about 2.5 minute break.
All right. Sounds like a plan. So I only got one. I think I only have Brighton left, right, Mr. Weintraub?
Correct.
All right. Yeah, man. I think I just if they didn't change anything else and just change the quarterback coach, I think the offense is better because I think the feel between QB coach and QB is better.
Well, and didn't Weiss have red zone play calling last year?
Down the red zone, yes.
And that was the worst part of the offense last year, in my opinion.
Well, at least the red zone stuff, they did some really questionable things.
Yeah,
they did fix some things, and they did some
things that
were very Ravens to fix it.
But like when they fixed the things, it's kind of like, all right, well, it kind of felt like Gaddis last year, where like halfway through the season they stopped doing a bunch of dumb crap.
Mm-hmm.
And then Gaddis leaves. I'm like, well, what happened there?
If you recall, like they were doing all this dumb stuff in the red zone and it wasn't working. And then they just go to like, okay, we're gonna run dives. And
right, they ran the same play 5 times against Rutgers and got in on 4th down.
Right.
It's
And then
just
they
like-
finally said, okay, we need to do something right. And they ran belly and they ran like they put in that run with JJ just takes the ball and goes, and they just have Quorum lead block for
Well,
him.
I mean,
like,
they were running
worked.
straight up like slow mesh zone reads on the 5-yard line, and I'm like,
right.
that doesn't work against cover 0, right? Like, because
Yeah.
What are we
'cause the
doing here?
safety's already there.
the
That's
safety's
Yeah.
like 2 yards off the line of scrimmage. What do we
Yeah.
think is going to happen?
they have enough guys for this. Unless you get
Yeah.
Latham Ransom just randomly going after the quarterback when he's
Well, that wasn't in the red zone, but yeah. So
no, but yeah.
like the whole drumbeat this offseason has kind of been like, well, Matt Weiss was bad at everything, and I'm like, well, it's probably not true.
Nah, he wasn't bad at everything.
I'm glad to
Back
hear
on
that
radio
like,
about 30.
he like had like something that he brought to the table, because there's a little bit much, right? It's
Yeah,
like,
well, listen. I mean, you can't. I mean, you look at how beastly they become in the run game. You got to give him some of the credit, a lot of the credit for helping them do that.
Yeah, and one thing I liked is they ran a lot last year on 2nd and 10, 2nd and 9, and we ended up in a lot of 3rd and 2s, 3rd and 3s.
Well-
And for me, a person who doesn't want to punt ever anyway, I love being in those situations.
Well, I mean, the thing is that like, but they just didn't use
Standby guys
JJ
coming back on radio.
his legs appropriately,
Well,
which I think
like,
is a little bit odd. Like they didn't
well, no,
they didn't
it's
run
the
JJ
injury
until
thing.
Back on
No,
radio in 5, 4, 3.
And we are back, folks, here on the Michigan Insider Sports Talk 1050 WTKA, online at WTKA.com. Are you in the market for a new vehicle? Get on board with Brighton Ford by going to BrightonFord.com. Call 1-800-NEW-FORD or make it out to the lot at 8240 West Grand River Avenue in Brighton, Michigan. That's where John Cuter and his outstanding crew will take great care of you with deals like the one on the 2023 Bronco Sport. Get into one of those right now for $291 a month with $4,500 down, or $407 a month with $500 down. Or how about the 2023 Explorer, $256 a month with $4,500 down, or $437 a month with $500 down. And last but not least, 2023 F-150, that award-winning pickup, $298 a month with $3,500 down, or $427 a month with $500 down. For those and other great deals, get on board with Brighton Ford by going to BrightonFord.com. Call 1-800-NEW-FORD or make it out to the lot at 8240 West Grand River Avenue in Brighton, Michigan. Quarterback dependence. I think that, one of the staples of Michigan's offense in the Jim Harbaugh era is that they haven't been very QB dependent. You can make the argument maybe they haven't had that kind of quarterback. And in the case of last year, it took a minute for JJ to be healthy enough to be that kind of quarterback. But now they're there. Now you have the kind of dude, Brian, Seth, and Craig, where you can go into the game and I said heading into the Ohio State, gotta let them cook, gotta let them eat. Now it's partly born of necessity that they did that with JJ in that game. But another thing that I could sense in out of this camp, as I talk to people, is that is on the menu. More QB dependence on JJ. There is a greater pre-snap menu for him. He can change protections. He can change plays. He can change routes. These are all things that he didn't have a whole lot of liberty with last year. So the trust factor that they are placing in him is on a different level. And frankly, I think that's what you got to have to get your championship teams by and large. I mean, look at Stetson Bennett. They put a whole hell of a lot on Stetson Bennett. If you got to be able to do that with your quarterback, in my opinion, if you're going to win a championship, what say you?
Yeah, I mean, Stetson Bennett is older than Craig, though, so like,
Yeah, but only by a couple of years.
so like he was like 26 or something last year, and JJ is still, he's a true junior. I think he's a little bit young especially because a lot of guys get held back so they can be quarterbacks, that kind of thing. So relative to his competitors, he's still kind of developing, and I have faith that he's going to get there. But I don't even know if we want JJ doing protection calls. Like your center went to Stanford.
True.
We're good. But yeah, changing the routes and getting into the right play, I think is something that's important. I mean, for me, it's just kind of late in the year, Ohio State and the TCU game. We saw teams just absolutely load up on Michigan, and it took them a while to adjust. So Michigan doesn't really start going deep until the Cornelius Johnson shot, when that's halfway through the second quarter. And against TCU, like they ran that flea flicker, and I immediately said to the person I went to the game with, they should run that the next play. They should just keep running flea flickers until TCU defends it. But they only went through they only had the 6 play action attempts, and in both of those games, they did not run JJ until the second half.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
Yeah, that was definitely something we talked about a lot in that TCU game. You gotta balance it. How much do you run him? But you gotta run him to establish it. Like you gotta present the threat.
I mean, look what happened in the Penn State game. Like he gets 62 yards of offense, and most of that is in the first half. And it could have been a couple of touchdowns, but Michigan didn't block it right. And then in the second half, both of Michigan's huge touchdown runs, the fact that J.J. McCarthy kept the ball in the first half were key to both of those. So in any game against an opponent more intimidating than Rutgers, J.J. McCarthy should have a couple of first half carries. And I know that there's an injury risk that comes along with doing it, but there's an injury risk to dropping back in the pocket, and he's going to be able to get down most of the time. He's pretty good about not getting lit up. And as Seth said earlier in this podcast, I don't think you can just tiptoe through a football season.
Yeah.
You gotta play like you mean it. And I think having JJ have the ball a couple times in the first half of a football game is part of that.
Yeah, present the threat. Don't be belligerent.
Right.
Could not agree more. I mean, that's just right on. You can't go 2/3 of a season just protecting a guy from injury. It ain't gonna work, and you can get injured on any play anyway. So yeah,
I mean, if you want to protect him, if you want to do the math on what's going to be more dangerous, the much more dangerous thing is to get into the third quarter and need your quarterback to win you back, right? Because that's when he's really taking shots. The shots that you take when you're stepping back to pass are the ones that cause major injury. You get dinged up running the ball. So if you use his legs a little bit early in the game and that blows things open, because you remember one of those runs that I think it was Edwards or Corum's run, Kalen King, great cornerback for Penn State, is completely removing himself from the play because he's freaking out about JJ. And that was the one game that Michigan established that run. You get that, you're going to be running Alex Orji in the fourth quarter, not having JJ McCarthy drop back. So if you want to protect your quarterback from injury, use his legs a little early in the game where it's a low risk, and if you get stinged up, it's like a little knee thing or something, versus putting yourself in a position where you might actually need him to stand in the pocket and take a hit in order to come back later on.
Yeah, I wonder.
Agree.
They're going to run him. Can you run them? It's about running them responsibly, but I don't think they're going to avoid running them out of fear of injury. So I think we'll see what you're talking about. One thing I wonder if we'll see this year, it just staying on the page of being more QB dependent than they have been, is I wonder if we'll see them RPO him more this year. They have been reluctant. That's not a huge part of their menu, but man, if you trust your quarterback, I mean, there are going to be some opportunities out there. That's how Georgia sliced and diced Michigan in the Orange Bowl. I mean, it was RPO city for Stetson Bennett. That's monking. I mean, trusting a walk-on at the time. I shouldn't even refer to him like that.
Yeah, not at that
anymore.
point in his career.
Yeah, because it was a mistake to think that Michigan had an advantage in that game. I can say that in retrospect. But you could see how much trust they had in their quarterback. I think it was like 13, 14 RPOs in the first half. If you have trust in your quarterback, there are some big plays to be had in that regard. If you trust your quarterback like that. So I wonder if we'll see. That's more of an open question. I don't have any intel on that like I do with the with the spacing and the timing of the passing game and more on his pre-snap menu. This is more just an open question when they RPO him.
Well, I remember in the Hawaii game, he had one, and
he did.
Like, it was a touchdown. He yanked it out of the belly of the running back and just lasered it in. I think it was to Roman Wilson. And I was like, oh, here we go. And then I don't know if he had it. He probably did, but I don't remember another RPO all year.
Right.
I'm sure that there were some that I missed or I'm just not remembering. But yeah, and so one thing that we track mesh point decisions that we think are live, because we know that some of them aren't live. Like JJ's not going to keep the ball against Rutgers, fine. And as a backup, when he was a freshman, Seth charted JJ for 40 zone read decisions, and I charted him for 40 zone read decisions last year. So you can see how much more willing they were to take shots with him holding the ball, making decisions when he was a freshman, because he wasn't the starting quarterback. I don't think that there's any doubt that JJ can make those reads, because we consistently, I mean, he was like 33 out of 40, and then he was 30 out of 40 on zone reads. And that's the kind of quick decision making that you need to make on an RPO too. His RPO grading on our site is very good as well. So I don't think that there's any question that he can do that. And then can you imagine being a safety trying to deal with, first of all, Michigan's ground game. Second of all, what if JJ has the ball? And second of all, what if this is an RPO? I mean, everybody's going to look like Lathan Ransom.
Which is why it's an open question. Will they do? I have no intel. I'm not asking this question suggesting that they're going to do it. I just wonder, kind of like we wondered openly last year about, hey man, are they going to call any more play action shots? Play action shots. We talked about that before the Ohio State game. I don't know if we just spoke that into existence or we were just thinking on the same page.
Well, Jim Knowles demanded it. He was like, you have to go deep on us. And they're like, okay.
Let's go. Let's go.
And TCU did the same thing. I know Michigan scored 45 points in the game, but that was on 18 possessions. So their offensive performance was distorted by how weird that game was. It wasn't quite what you would expect given the points put up. And that's what teams are going to do this year. One of the strange things about last year is Michigan goes into the Iowa game, and Iowa's like, we're just going to let you grind down the field. Like, we're going to keep our cover two intact. We're just going to bend and don't break. I mean, Michigan State did the same thing. Everybody up until the Illinois game just refused to put an extra guy in the box. And then you saw what started at Illinois, that Michigan's offensive approach started to hamper them for large periods of games. And they offset it with some big plays, but, you shouldn't be spending a third of the game before you get to those.
All right, so fellas, we are at that point where I know who the winner is for this weekend's game, but you just mentioned points. You got to give me your points, the score of the game. Let's start with you, Craig, because we haven't heard from you in a minute. So score
52-9.
52-9. Brian Cook.
40-17.
40-17. What's the line on the game?
29. Oh, okay.
Well, I saw something else.
Yeah, well, it's between 29 and 31. I saw 29.5 at one point. So
okay, still got them covering there. All right, and then of course Seth Fisher.
I'm going to change it up this year. I'm done with last year's whole bit, right? So I like Mason Garcia. I think our secondary is banged up. I think it's going to be 45-23.
Ooh.
Yeah, you're changing it up all right.
Yeah, I'm not doing that. I'm not going to say 42-27 every single game this year. All right, I'm totally different.
You're changing with the times.
I have more confidence in Michigan this year than I did last year. 45-23.
All right, well, fellas, as always, great stuff. Appreciate your time, and we'll see you next week on the MGoBlog Roundtable. To the rest of you, we'll see you tomorrow here on the Michigan Insider on Sports Talk 1050 WTK, The Ticket, the official voice of University of Michigan Sports, Ann Arbor, a Cumulus station.